You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. There's a certain model of handgun that's popular with gun owners across the country. It's also popular with law enforcement. But recently, some agencies, including right here in Tampa Bay, opted to remove the gun from their arsenals because of safety concerns. Coming up, you're going to hear from a journalist who's been covering this issue for The Trace and Mother Jones. Ava Sasani will explain why some police departments and sheriff's officers don't want officers using this gun and why these weapons are being sold back to the general public. Well, first, let's get an update on state politics. You remember back at the start of May, lawmakers were supposed to wrap up their 2 months of lawmaking by passing a budget, only they didn't. To help us understand what's been happening since then, here's WSF's Douglas Soule. Douglas, thanks so much for checking in. Appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me on.
Now, Douglas is a reporter with WSF's Your Florida team. He's based in Tallahassee, and he's covering the still ongoing legislative action. All right, so the session is still technically happening, and this is kind of unusual, right? Because lawmakers typically meet for about 2 months, they hash out the budget, they go home. But in May, they just couldn't come to an agreement. Just remind us why. Why did they not get that budget passed?
There were a lot of sticking points related to the final passage of a budget. Senate President Ben Alberton was a little bit wary of some recurring sales tax reductions that House Speaker Daniel Perez wanted, and that kind of snowballed from there, turned into an avalanche of drama that has led us to where we are today. I'm sitting in the Florida Capitol right now waiting for budget conferences. So the Capitol right now is pretty quiet, as quiet as it's been in past weeks with the lawmakers gone. I just dropped a pin on the walk to sit down for this phone call, and it echoed across the rotunda. So it's while we're waiting for lawmakers to meet, it feels like business as usual in terms of lawmakers not being here.
So back to those taxes though, right? So there was sales tax proposals, there was a property tax proposal, there was a lot of disagreement. What's happened to those? Are they going to come back and hash those out? Are they kicking it down the road till another session?
Yeah, let's talk about that property tax proposal. So Governor Ron DeSantis wanted around $1,000 property tax rebate for Floridians. That is not being considered. So that seems to be off the table. And we don't know yet how Governor DeSantis is going to respond to that. As I earlier mentioned, House Speaker Daniel Perez wanted across-the-board sales tax reduction. That's also been taken off the table for at least this year. Being considered instead right now is a negotiated agreement that includes $2.25 billion in recurring revenue reductions, and that does include some sales tax reductions. They haven't specified exactly what. For example, they mentioned in their memo last week that it's a permanent sales tax exemption targeted toward Florida families. We will find out later exactly what that means. And we also know that they want to eliminate the business rent tax, which would total about $900 million.
All right, so they're chipping away at some of those things there. The Senate and the House, they had different deadlines for extending the session. What does that mean? I mean, if they roll past June 30th, which is, I believe, the House deadline, what happens then?
Yeah, so last month, the House extended the deadline for the budget talks until the end of June. That was probably more than anything a negotiating tactic. In the memo we got late last week and the information that we've gotten this week, we know that lawmakers are tentatively wanting to get this done by June 16th. And so in a couple weeks' time, and what DeSantis does from there is up to him. He hasn't hugely weighed in on the proposal lawmakers have created. But of course, if this is not done by the end of June, that catapults into a government shutdown, which is something nobody wants.
Yeah, and that's something that you don't really hear talked about much in terms of state government. I mean, that's something that's always seems to be looming over federal government, but that would be an unusual situation for lawmakers in Florida to be facing.
It would be historic, unprecedented even, and it would come at a time where, we're already in hurricane season as of a couple days ago. Hopefully, if that were to happen, there wouldn't be a coinciding state emergency like that. Now, certain workers would still have to work, but certainly it wouldn't be a full ship in terms of state government operations at that time.
So in the meantime, the governor has been signing bills over the last couple of weeks. There have been some fairly high profile ones. I wonder if you just walk us through a few of them.
Yeah. Let's talk voter freedom. Certainly, Floridians are going to be seeing the effects of that in the coming months. That takes effect July 1st. So what the Voter Freedom Act does is it prevents law enforcement from randomly stopping and boarding boats for the reason of safety inspections. At the press conference where DeSantis signed that bill, he cited a person who claimed to have gotten stopped 3 times in one boating trip. That bill would prevent state law enforcement officers from stopping and boarding those boats without specifically probable cause. That happening was something that Governor DeSantis said created unnecessary friction between the boating community and law enforcement. Fluoride is another big bill that was recently signed by the governor. It would ban putting fluoride in public water systems. Now, Florida would be the second state to do that ahead of Utah, and it's that too would take effect on July 1st.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about dental health and dental health considerations, that's something that's going to be top of mind for Floridians come July 1st when they may lose their fluoride.
Right.
They haven't already. Some local communities have already opted to pull it.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I guess it's going to take a little while for the full effects of that to be seen, and I know a lot of dental health advocates are a bit concerned about that. All right, so Douglas, busy schedule, I guess, for you for the next couple of weeks as they try and get this budget figured out. What are you going to be paying close attention to as the next couple of weeks unfold?
Yeah, so we have the top line budgetary silos. We know that in terms of the general revenue, the proposed amount is just below $50 billion, which is lower than what the Senate and DeSantis pitched, but it's higher than what the House had.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at these budget conferences, we're going to get into the nitty gritty, the inch by inch of those top line appropriations, whether it be education, et cetera. And we're just going to have to see how it goes. It's going to be an incredibly interesting 2 weeks. And of course, the state is watching because if anything deteriorates, if even Governor DeSantis doesn't like something in the budget and either partially or fully vetoes it, that'll also create drama down the line.
And you'll be there to watch it all and bring it to us here at WSF. Douglas Soule covering Tallahassee as part of the Your Florida team, helping you make sense of state government. Thank you so much for your reporting and your insights. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You can find more Your Florida reporting on WSF.org. Still to come, why some law enforcement agencies, including here in Tampa Bay, are pulling a popular handgun from their arsenals. You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. The Sig Sauer P320 is one of the most popular handguns in the country, and it's part of the standard equipment issued to police officers and sheriff's deputies in many parts of the country too. But some of those law enforcement agencies, including here in Tampa Bay, have decided they don't want their officers using this handgun for safety reasons. They've removed it from their arsenals, and in some cases they've traded them in, and the guns ended up being sold to the public. Ava Sasani is a reporter for The Trace. Ava, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So your report for The Trace and Mother Jones opens with an account of a Milwaukee police officer who was accidentally shot by his partner's gun. Could you just kind of give us a summary of what happened in this story and what's significant about this one in particular? Like, why did you decide to open with that one?
Absolutely. We decided to start with this one because it is one of now a handful of incidents that we have where allegedly it appears, at least, that a Sig Sauer P320 gun, a very popular type of handgun, fires when the gun owner's hands appear to be nowhere near the gun or the trigger, and you can kind of see that the gun is holstered in this Milwaukee police officer's belt. And that incident is kind of unique in a few ways. It is one of the incidents that we have on camera. We're able to watch what happens from the officer's partner's body cam footage. And what you see is really startling. The two officers are inspecting this car. One of the officers bends down to reach into the car. And then all of a sudden, you hear a bang. The camera that you're watching from drops to the ground. You hear a scream. And we learn later, based on the police department's own review of the situation, that one of the officers' guns went off, apparently accidentally, hits his partner in the leg and does pretty significant damage to this officer's thigh. It's obviously a very traumatic incident. And again, I think it's helpful to see because you have all these allegations that Sig Sauer has pretty consistently denied. So it was handy to be able to watch it on camera.
Now, what did the Milwaukee Police Department do after the shooting? Because this kind of triggered a policy change effectively for this particular department, right?
Yes. So it's interesting because it was actually the third incident of its kind in Milwaukee where a P320 fired accidentally. They call them uncommanded discharges. It was the second where an officer was injured from an uncommanded discharge of a P320. But this incident, maybe because it was caught on camera, maybe because it was the third, was kind of the last straw for the department. The Milwaukee Police's police union actually then sues the city of Milwaukee, saying, you should have known that this gun, the P320, was potentially unreliable and unsafe, because at that point, 2022, we already had a decent amount of reports. Now we have even more, but even then we had a good amount of reports of this gun firing accidentally and causing injuries. So after that, they sue the city. The city agrees to support a transition to a different weapon, a Glock, one of Sig Sauer's competitors. For whatever reason, this third incident precipitated that change.
Okay, so can we just step back a little bit and tell us a little bit about this particular gun? Because as you pointed out before, it's very popular, not just among police departments and law enforcement agencies, but among the general public too, right? It's pretty common.
Yes, it's incredibly common. It is a handgun that was put on the market about a decade ago now, I believe in 2014. It gets a lot of success early on because the company Sig Sauer, it's a New Hampshire-based gun maker, they win a contract with the federal government that I think gives it a sort of cachet and legitimacy. At thousands of law enforcement agencies across the country then start using this gun as their sidearm of choice. I think because of a combination of reasons, in part because it is more affordable than many of its competitors. And as more and more agencies are adopting it, you also see a good deal of popularity among civilian gun buyers as well.
All right, so you have a lot of police agencies and sheriff's departments and other law enforcement agencies picking up this gun and equipping their officers or their deputies with it. But per your reporting, there's also been agencies such as the Milwaukee Police Department, not the only one, that's decided this isn't something we really want our officers to be using, and they've decided to pull back. So how many police agencies or law enforcement agencies do you know of that decided to stop equipping their officers with this handgun?
Absolutely. So over the course of 2 months, my partner, Champ Barton, and I interviewed about 70 law enforcement agencies across the country. We found that more than 20 of those agencies, and some of them are pretty big areas like Oklahoma City, Denver, Chicago, have decided to stop using the gun because of concerns that it could fire unintentionally. And among those 20, about a dozen said that in order to pay for a transition to a new weapon, which is quite expensive, they decided to essentially sell the old P320s that were previously owned by the department to the public.
All right. So, and this is picking up on something you mentioned before about the fact that one of the reasons for the popularity is affordability. So you then have police departments, law enforcement agencies saying, we're going to recoup some of the cost of equipping our officers with these guns by basically trading them in. And there's a Tampa Bay connection here too. One of the police agencies you looked at, one of the law enforcement agencies you investigated, or that was part of your reporting here, is Pasco County. So tell us a little bit about what happened there. What was the event that precipitated the Pasco County Sheriff's Office to say we're going to recall or take these guns out of our arsenal?
Absolutely. I will zoom out for a second and say that the practice that we're looking at here, where a police department gets rid of their old guns by trading them in to the gun dealer, who then gives them a credit that is put towards the new purchases. It's very similar to how when you're trading in an old car,
Hmm.
you can bring that vehicle in and the dealership gives you a certain value that's put towards your next purchase.
Sure.
Many police departments do that with guns.
Hmm.
So in that sense, Pasco County Sheriff's Office is not particularly unique. What is a highlight for us is three different deputies at Pasco County Sheriff's Office said that they were injured after their P320s discharged unintentionally. And after those three different officers survived potentially deadly incidents, we have to remember that, last year, allegedly somebody was killed in one of these accidents with the P320. But after those three deputies survived those incidents, Pasco County decides to resell more than 800 of these guns to fund their transition to a new weapon, to the Glock. And when we asked them why they made that decision, they said it was the cost of transitioning to a new weapon is too expensive, and they needed to do that in order to fund the change.
Hmm. Now, the company that makes the gun, Sig Sauer, actually has a website, as you point out in your reporting, explaining its side of the story. So what has been the argument from Sig Sauer about the complaints or the issues that people have raised with this particular handgun?
Yeah. Sig Sauer has been pretty consistent in their response to these allegations. They've said that essentially this is all negligence. They've said that it's user error,
Hmm.
and that any gun is dangerous, and their guns are not more or less dangerous than any other competitors. They essentially say there's nothing wrong with our gun. It's just negligence on the part of the people making these allegations.
Now, I was just looking at some stats, and I read that in 2023, Floridians bought more than 1.3 million firearms. And that was just according to one report I read. So that's a lot of guns floating around in Florida. How do you then sort of weigh up the 800 guns the Pasco County Sheriff's Office has sold back to the dealer against that number? Like, what's the significance of it?
That's an interesting question. I think it's hard to say because part of what we've learned at the Trace by following this practice of police trade-ins is it's not just that these guns go to the public market. It's that we in the United States have such a bad system of tracking what happens to a gun and the lifespan of a gun that a police officer's gun can be bought secondhand, in this case, a P320, and then resold, bought, resold, stolen, resold, bought again. And in the course of that lifespan of a gun, it can travel across states. We know that many of the guns that are used by police officers, when they're after getting onto the secondhand market, they end up being used in crimes. So I think the thing for us is it's this big question mark of what happens. And another thing, specifically in the context of P320s, the problem for us wasn't the quantity of the guns so much as you as a law enforcement agency have said that your responsibility is to keep people safe. By your own appraisal, these guns are not safe. So why then do you feel that you can abdicate responsibility after the guns are resold? It's this nebulous responsibility that I think many agencies would say that's not our problem. What happens to our old guns is not our responsibility. It's not up to us to decide what guns are legal or illegal.
Hmm.
But again, I hope our story brings to mind the question of, do law enforcement officers have responsibility to know where their old weapons end up?
And to your point, it sort of speaks to a bigger question, I think, about just the attitude of Americans to firearms in general. There's this sort of philosophical I guess, thing underpinning this about how guns are traced and the responsibility people using them have to be safe and keep them safe. And you also got a range of responses from law enforcement agencies that use this particular firearm, right? So what did you hear at either end of the spectrum? Because it wasn't completely consistent.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really good, I think, as you alluded to, allegory for overall attitudes in the U.S. towards firearms, because some departments, like Denver, I think is a good example. They didn't have any reported accidents of their own, but they were watching what other folks did and other law enforcement agencies and officials who've reported these accidents and said, better safe than sorry, we're going to do our own testing and we are going to change our firearms policy. That's one case. Another is what many of the departments who still use this gun told us is, well, we've never had a problem with it. So why would we pay for what is ultimately an expensive transition to a new gun based on something we're just hearing from other people? Now, that's over 100 reports on the books in lawsuits of people being injured alone. Some of these people are gruesomely injured and have to have their whole careers halted. But they sort of that other camp sort of takes the attitude of, well, we have not encountered a problem with it, so we're just gonna keep on keeping on and assume that everything is fine.
I also found it interesting reading some of the other reporting that the Trace has done on this particular firearm before your report was published, interviewing some of the folks who had been injured. There's a bit of hesitancy about coming forward and talking about what happened, right? There's a sense of shame almost about saying, well, my gun went off accidentally and I was injured or somebody else was injured.
Absolutely. Yeah, my colleague Champ Barton has done really excellent coverage of this since we started hearing reports of potential issues with the Sig Sauer P320. I think some of that has to be attributed to the company's public stance that, again, these are instances of negligence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think there also maybe is a hesitancy to play into that negligence. And I don't know. I think among gun owners, it's fair to say that there, and gun owners are not a monolith, of course, but
Sure.
it's fair to say there is this ethos of personal responsibility
Mm-hmm.
and admitting that there was an accident, which the gun maker has very successfully maintained is your fault, admitting that potentially you were injured by something that could have been your fault is this betrayal of that core ethos of personal responsibility. I think in large part that is attributed to the company's line.
I wonder too if you've had some feedback from not just law enforcement folks since the publication of your story, but just gun owners in general, because a lot of them, people who are around firearms a lot and use them frequently, they have pretty strong opinions about it and they follow some of the stuff, some of the reporting on it very closely, and they're looking for things that may not track with their experience. So what have you heard from people since the story came out?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting responses we got was from a alderman, a local official in Milwaukee, who said they're going to be looking into the practice of selling police guns and specifically why the department decided to resell the old P320s.
Mm-hmm.
We also, of course, got a good deal of pushback from certain uh, gun rights blogs who follow our work. Um, Again, I think maybe it comes down to this thing of personal responsibility over. I don't think this is true, but we've encountered this sense that if you are complaining about these guns potentially being unsafe, you are unfairly blaming Sig Sauer, which is this very unique phenomenon in the firearms industry that I think the conversation around guns follows the law around it, which US law, thanks to decades of very successful lobbying, make it really, really hard to sue a gun manufacturer. That's why these cases against Sig Sauer are so unique. They're gun companies in the United States are incredibly shielded from lawsuits like this. So I think that law kind of translates into these conversations of why are you blaming the company? It is, again, an individual's fault and responsibility to make sure that nothing dangerous happens with a gun.
So, Ava, aside from drawing attention to this one particular firearm and some of the issues that people have raised with it and how law enforcement agencies are dealing with it in different ways, what kind of conversation are you hoping opens up from this? Like, what would you like to see happen next, or what could be one of the outcomes of this?
I'm not sure. I think, at least for me, what I think is interesting about this is when a law enforcement agency says that line of, well, we are not responsible for litigating what guns can or cannot be sold or can or cannot be bought. That is technically true. And that is because firearms, unlike any other consumer good in this country, are essentially very lightly, if at all, regulated. So I think I am interested in this question of what do we expect from our law enforcement officials, from our governments, from our public safety leaders in a legal system that has this vacuum of regulation and monitoring for firearms, right? Because they are correct. These cops and sheriffs, they are not responsible for dictating what the public can or cannot buy. But then if nobody is, do we have a responsibility to each other to make sure that what is available to the public is generally safe? I think more than anything, I would like folks to be thinking about what happens in that vacuum of monitoring and regulation.
Well, we've been speaking with Ava Sasani. She's one of the reporters on a story, A Gun Deemed Too Dangerous for Cops but Fines for Civilians, that was published in collaboration with Mother Jones. You can find that reporting on their website. Ava, thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's our show for this week. Florida Matters executive producer is Grayson Doctor. Engineering support from Jackson Harp and Blake Bass. Subscribe to Florida Matters wherever you get your podcasts and watch on YouTube. I'm Matthew Petty. Thank you for listening.